the CTN. I'm your host, Robert Van Slooten. Let's get started. Previously, we discussed the notion of an application object that's out there, and it has a delegate called application delegate, which is created automatically when you create the project. That enables you to do certain types of activities during certain phases of the application, which we haven't discussed yet. But the application object also has behavior that's useful, and you can actually get access to it. We're going to make use of that. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to demonstrate a application to you. I have an application called Badge running in the simulator. The simulator is running in 3.5-inch iPhone mode at a 100% scale factor. I have a UI control here called Stepper, and if I hit plus, the integer value increases here. It'll max out at 10, and I can go down. If I hit the home button, what you see is an icon, not the default one, an icon for this app, and a badge, with the badge value being the same as the integer value that was displayed in the label. If I go all the way down to 0, which is an indication there's no badge, go back to the home page, the badge disappears. In addition, if I rotate this, the views stay in their previous orientation. If I go upside down, that's still true. Let's go over to Xcode and we'll take a look at how this works. Alright, I started with a single view application like we always have, just for iPhone. And from the library, I dragged in a UI stepper and two labels. One is static and the other one displays the integer. There's two properties. There's one for the label and there's one for the stepper. And there's one action for when the stepper changes. In actuality, these are really two buttons, but there's one action produced when either one gets hit. And there's a value, which is actually a double, which is changed based on some parameterization. Now, I did not change any attributes of these objects in the attribute inspector. I'm actually doing them programmatically. Keep in mind that in what you see in the attribute inspector is basically a set of properties for the object, and those values can be changed programmatically rather than through the attribute inspector. We're going to take a look at the action first, and this is the action when one of these two, the plus or minus, is actually hit. The first thing I do is I look at self.stepper.value, which is actually a double, but I'm setting it equal to an NS integer called value, and that's actually going to cast it to an int. Since the default increment is 1 anyway, the double is always going to be an integer value. Keep in mind that NS integer is just simply type def to a standard int C type. I'm going to set the label to what that value is, and you've seen this before. This is the string with format. Now this is the part that is new. To get access to the application object, remember it is a singleton, I call a method on the class UI application called shared application, and that simply returns the pointer to the application object. And on that, I'm going to change the property application icon badge number, which is actually the default value being 0, meaning no badge is displayed. And that's all it is. Now, there is some initialization. When the application starts and the view gets loaded, and we haven't been in here before, there's a method that's called viewDidLoad, and this happens after the view controller comes up and the view actually gets loaded. You're required to call the base classes method because there is some functionality that happens. But in here, I want to set the maximum value of the stepper. I want to set it equal to 10. Now that was just purely arbitrary, so self.stepper.maximum value equals 10. And what I want to do is I want to get the current badge number, because if this application ends up getting terminated, it's still going to have a badge value in the system, and I want to keep that value. So what I do is I go out and I read through getting the application object again. I actually read the value that we set previously, load that into an integer, and I use that to set up the stepper. I set its value, and I go and write the label. And that's all it is. Keep in mind that this is just a simple application for the purposes of learning about the badge and the application object. Generally, the badge would be the result of some sort of network activity saying, well, you got new mail or there's updates. You've seen this on your own device. We'll go to the next slide, and we're going to look at some of the properties of the project that end up giving us our rotation characteristics and also our icon. I now have the project selected and the General tab. There's an area here for device orientation. Now normally, by default, if you create an iPhone application, these two checkboxes would be checked off. Both landscape orientations would be allowed. Upside down generally is not supported because it's confusing with telephones, with answering phones because of the mic speaker orientation. I simply turned these off and disallowed those two orientations. Now keep in mind that if I had created an iPad application, I had settings for an iPad, and by standards, applications are required to rotate by the user interface guidelines for iPads. If a universal application was picked, I'd have settings for both types of devices. We'll now move on and we'll start talking about the icon. All right, what about the icon? Well, there's two types of images. There's icons and there's launch images. An icon is something that's displayed on the Springboard, settings, and in Spotlight. A launch image is something that is displayed when the application starts. We don't have a launch image, and actually we only have one icon, the Springboard icon. Because there are different types of devices with different resolutions, iPhone 5 is bigger than iPhone 4, there's a necessity for multiples of these particular types of images. They're all PNGs. There's compression technology that makes them smaller inside the iOS technology. There's two ways of bringing them into the application. There's the asset catalog and not using the asset catalog. we're not going to cover not using the asset catalog, at least at this point in time. To take a look at the asset catalog, you go to this images.xc assets file, and you'll see app icons and launch images indicated. Pick app icons, and I dragged in a file which is a PNG that is 120 by 120. It says 60 point here, but it's ×2, so that's the size. There are no icon for the other two, for the settings and for the springboard. And there's also no launch image in this case. Obviously there's two different sizes because of the 4-inch and 3.5. Now, if I had an iPad application, it would be a different situation. I had a universal application, then a lot more images would be required. That's the end of the episode. Let's close out. Okay, just as a object-oriented note, I use the term singleton, and just to indicate what that is it's a class where there can only be one instance of the object. In other words, it can't be created multiple times. And usually there's checks in there to make sure it isn't created multiple times. There's only one application object. There's other singletons in the system. There's a device, there's screen, there's a few others. Thanks for watching.